My name is Madison, and I am 33 years old. While I lay unconscious in the intensive care unit, my parents quietly sold my house, my jewelry, and everything that defined my hard-earned life, acting as if I was already gone. But they had no idea about the secret door behind my kitchen, and what I had hidden there would turn their entire world upside down the moment I awoke. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, because what happened to me goes beyond any normal family dysfunction. Waking up from a 3-week coma is not like falling asleep and simply opening your eyes. It is a violent, disorienting tear back into reality. The harsh, sterile fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit blinded me instantly. The rhythmic, mechanical hissing of the ventilator had been my only companion in the dark, and my throat burned like swallowed glass from the recently removed breathing tube. I tried to move my arms, but my muscles felt like lead. The last thing I remembered was a business lunch with a wealthy client tasting a new seafood dish, and then the sudden terrifying closure of my airway. Anaphylactic shock. Severe and unforgiving. As a high-end estate liquidator, I was used to being in absolute control. My daily life consisted of appraising multi-million-dollar properties, cataloging rare antiques, and negotiating with ruthless heirs, fighting over family fortunes. I made decisions that moved millions of dollars with a single signature. Yet lying in that hospital bed, I was completely powerless. I pressed the call button with a trembling finger, my mind racing. Where was my mother, Cynthia? Where was my father, Richard? They should have been pacing the waiting room, demanding updates from the doctors, acting like the devoted suburban parents they always pretended to be at their exclusive country club. A nurse hurried into the room. Her name tag read Brenda, and her eyes widened in absolute shock when she saw me trying to sit up. She rushed to my side, checking my vitals on the monitor, her hands fluttering over the wires attached to my chest. "You are awake," she whispered, sounding as if she had just seen a ghost. "You are actually awake. Where is my family?" I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. "Did someone call my parents?" Brenda froze. The professional, comforting smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of deep, uncomfortable pity. She looked down at her clipboard, avoiding my gaze entirely. It was the same look I had seen on the faces of distant relatives when they realized they were cut out of a wealthy Uncle Will. It was the look of someone holding a terrible, ugly truth. "Where are they, Brenda?" I demanded, forcing myself up onto my elbows despite the agonizing pain in my chest. She hesitated, biting her lip before slowly reaching into a folder at the end of my bed. "I think you need to see this," she said quietly. She handed me a thick stack of legal papers bearing the hospital official letterhead. I squinted at the text, my vision still slightly blurry from the heavy medications. It was a medical directive form, a refusal of care document. "Your parents were here last week," Brenda explained, her voice trembling slightly. "They met with the hospital administration. They claimed that your medical bills were draining their resources and that you had no chance of a meaningful recovery. They signed these papers to refuse any financial responsibility for your ongoing care, and they officially requested that we withdraw life support." The words punched the breath out of my lungs. Withdraw life support. Pull the plug. My own parents. I stared at their familiar signatures at the bottom of the page. Cynthia, elegant looping cursive. Richard, hurried scrawl. They had signed away my life. "But I am breathing," I choked out, gripping the paper so hard my knuckles turned white. "I am alive." The hospital ethics committee intervened, Brenda said quickly. "Your brain scans showed sustained neurological activity. Our chief of neurology refused to comply with their request because you were showing microscopic signs of improvement. We tried to call them to update them on your progress 2 days ago, but the numbers they provided were disconnected from our system. They completely washed their hands of you." A cold, sharp realization pierced through the fog of my medication. My parents were vain, selfish people. My mother was drowning in credit card debt to keep up appearances with her wealthy friends, and my father was too weak to ever stop her. They always favored my younger sister Savannah, treating her like royalty while viewing my independence as a threat. But to actively try to end my life, that meant something else entirely. That meant they had a massive financial incentive. "I need a phone," I said, my voice suddenly deadly calm. The shock was instantly replaced by the ruthless analytical mindset that made me the best in my industry. "Give me your phone, right now." Brenda looked startled but pulled her smartphone from her scrubs and handed it to me. I did not hesitate. I opened the web browser and typed in the web address for my primary bank. My fingers were bruised and uncoordinated, missing the keys twice before I finally managed to enter my secure login credentials. I was a woman who checked her portfolios every single morning before coffee. I knew exactly what my net worth was down to the last cent. I had emergency funds, business accounts, and personal savings that I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. The banking dashboard loaded. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, triggering an alarm on the heart monitor next to my bed. Available balance: $0. I frantically clicked on my business checking account. $0. My high-yield savings account. $0. Even my emergency medical fund had been completely drained. Every single account had been systematically wiped clean. They had used a fraudulent power of attorney. They had taken everything. A sick, nauseating dread washed over me as another thought struck. If they had access to my liquid assets, they had access to everything else. I opened a new tab and navigated to Zillow, the real estate application. My hands shook violently as I typed in the address of my beautifully restored $1.2 million historic home. The home I had spent 3 years meticulously renovating from top to bottom. The page loaded, and the bright red text across the top of the listing felt like a physical blow to the face. Sold. Closed 4 days ago. I dropped the phone onto the hospital blanket. While I was fighting for every breath in a medically induced coma, my family had not just abandoned me to die. They had stripped my carcass bare. They had stolen my life savings and sold my sanctuary to the highest bidder, tossing me away like a piece of worthless trash. But as the initial wave of devastation passed, a dark, dangerous smile slowly crept across my face. They thought they had taken everything. They thought I was just a sad, lonely woman who hoarded old furniture. They had absolutely no idea that the house they just sold under fraudulent terms did not even belong to me personally, and they had no clue about the titanium-reinforced vault hidden behind my kitchen wall. I gripped the borrowed phone so tightly the plastic casing creaked. I did not waste time crying. Tears were a luxury for people who still had hope, and I had none left for these people. I dialed my mother number from memory. It rang twice before she picked up. Loud chatter and the distinct high-pitched clinking of crystal champagne glasses flooded through the speaker. She was at the country club. While I was lying in a hospital gown, smelling of antiseptic, my mother was day drinking with her socialite friends. "Hello," Cynthia answered, her voice bright and bubbly. "Mom," I said. "It is Madison." The background noise seemed to halt entirely on her end. A sharp intake of breath hissed through the receiver. "Maddie." She sounded irritated, not relieved. "You are awake. The doctors told us you were practically gone. They said your organs were shutting down. Is that why you emptied my bank accounts?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the quiet hospital room. "Is that why my house is listed as sold on Zillow?" Cynthia did not miss a beat. Her tone shifted instantly from surprise to incredibly defensive, dropping the country club sweetness for her usual condescending bark. "Keep your voice down," she snapped. "Do not be so dramatic, Madison. We had to make executive decisions. You were on life support and the hospital bills were piling up. You signed a refusal of care document." I shot back, my anger turning into razor-sharp focus. "You tried to pull the plug to secure your theft. You forged a medical power of attorney to bypass the probate court. It was not forged." Cynthia scoffed defensively. "We are your parents. We had the right to step in when you were incapacitated, and frankly, you should be thanking us. We saved this family from absolute ruin." Andre made some bad investments. My brother-in-law, Andre, the arrogant finance bro who constantly mocked my estate liquidator business while bragging about his crypto portfolio. He had married my younger sister Savannah 3 years ago, and my parents worshipped the ground he walked on. Andre got hit with a massive margin call. Cynthia continued, her voice laced with righteous indignation, as if I was the one inconveniencing them. He was going to lose everything, Madison. Everything. His firm would have fired him for his personal debt exposure. Savannah was hysterical. You know how fragile your sister is. She needs funding for her IVF treatments. She deserves to be a mother. She deserves a beautiful life without financial stress. And what about my life? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Cynthia sighed heavily, a sound of pure exasperation. Let us be realistic, Maddie. You are 33 years old and single. You spend your days digging through dead people's belongings. You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You did not need a $1.2 million house just for yourself. Savannah is building a real family. Andre is a financial genius who just hit a temporary rough patch in the market. We took your assets to cover his margin call and save their future. Consider it your sacrifice for the family. We all have to do our part. I listened to the woman who gave birth to me justify stripping my entire existence to fund my sister designer lifestyle and her husband reckless gambling. They had literally sold the roof over my head to pay off crypto debts. They viewed my hard-earned assets as a backup fund for their golden child. You sold my house, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. We got a cash buyer, Cynthia said proudly, completely oblivious to the lethal silence on my end. A house flipper who wanted the lot fast. We gave him a great deal to close in 4 days. The money is already transferred. Andre used it to secure his accounts, and Savannah just booked her first fertility clinic appointment. So please do not ruin this by throwing a tantrum. You can stay in our guest room when they discharge you. We will help you find a nice little apartment somewhere affordable. Now I have to go. The club is serving lunch and Savannah is waiting for me. We are celebrating our fresh start. Cynthia hung up. I slowly lowered the phone. The screen faded to black. The sheer audacity. The absolute monstrous entitlement. They were celebrating my supposed death with champagne bought using my money. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought because I was the unmarried sister without a flashy finance job, I was an easy target. Brenda. The nurse stepped forward, her hands raised cautiously. Honey, you need to lie back down. Your heart rate is spiking. I ignored her. I threw off the thin hospital blanket. The cool air hit my bare legs, but I did not feel the chill. A sudden surge of adrenaline flooded my veins, masking the pain in my chest. I grabbed the IV line taped to the back of my hand. Ma'am, do not! Brenda warned, stepping closer. I ripped the needle out in one swift motion. A drop of blood splattered against the pristine white linoleum floor. I did not flinch. I tossed the plastic tubing onto the bed and swung my legs over the side. I need my clothes, I ordered. You cannot leave. Brenda pleaded, her voice rising in panic. You just woke up from a coma. You are medically unstable. I am calling the doctor. Call whoever you want, I said, grabbing my personal belongings bag from the plastic bin in the corner. But I am checking out against medical advice. My family just declared war, and I am not fighting it from a hospital bed. I pulled out my own cell phone, which had been powered off inside the bag. I turned it on, ignoring the flood of missed notifications from clients and contractors. I bypassed all of them and dialed the only number that mattered right now. Harrison. He was my former boss, a shark of a lawyer, and the only person in this city more ruthless than I was. He answered on the first ring. Madison, where the hell have you been? I have been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. I was in a coma, I stated flatly, wrestling myself into my jeans despite my shaking hands. My parents tried to pull the plug on me. Then they used a fake power of attorney to drain my bank accounts and sell my house to a cash buyer to pay off Andre crypto debts. Silence on the other end. Then a low, dangerous chuckle. Harrison was not horrified. He was intrigued. Those idiots actually sold your house. They think they did, I said, pulling my shirt over my head. I need you to come pick me up at the General Hospital right now. Bring your laptop. I am on my way, Harrison said. Should I prepare a civil suit for stolen funds? No, I replied, walking out of the hospital room while Brenda shouted for security. Civil suits take too long. We are going straight for federal crimes. They thought they sold my personal property. They have no idea the house is legally owned by Apex Estate LLC, which I incorporated entirely offshore for privacy reasons. They just committed wire fraud and title theft across state lines. And the buyer, Harrison asked? Some amateur house flipper looking for a quick turnaround, I said, stepping into the elevator. He probably thinks he scored the deal of a lifetime. But he is about to get a very nasty surprise. They sold him the walls and the roof, but they missed the real prize. I looked down at my left wrist, rubbing the small, imperceptible bump under my skin. As an estate liquidator dealing with multi-million-dollar assets, I took my personal security very seriously. They do not know about the vault hidden behind the kitchen wall. I told Harrison the elevator doors sliding shut. And they definitely do not know that the only key to open it is a biometric microchip implanted right under my skin. Let them drink their champagne today. By tomorrow, they will be begging for mercy. Harrison pulled his black SUV up to the hospital entrance. I practically fell into the passenger seat, still wearing my hospital scrub pants and a borrowed oversized hoodie. I looked like a walking corpse, pale, bruised, and completely unhinged, but my mind had never been sharper. Drive to the house. I commanded, my voice hoarse. Harrison slammed on the gas. He tried to hand me a cup of coffee, but I ignored it. I needed the anger to fuel me. When we pulled onto my quiet, tree-lined street, the devastation hit me instantly. A massive commercial dumpster sat on my manicured front lawn, crushing the hydrangeas I had planted last spring. The heavy thud of sledgehammers echoed through the open front door. Dust billowed out of the windows like smoke from a war zone. I did not wait for Harrison to park. I threw the car door open and marched straight up the driveway, ignoring the sharp pain radiating through my chest from the ripped-out IV. I stormed into the foyer. My beautiful custom oak floors were covered in industrial tarps and drywall debris. Two contractors were violently tearing down the floating staircase I had imported from Italy. "Stop!" I screamed, coughing as the thick dust coated my raw throat. I said, "Stop tearing apart my house." A man stepped out from what used to be my formal dining room. He wore a tight polo shirt, mirrored sunglasses resting on the back of his neck, and a smug grin that instantly made my blood boil. He looked like every arrogant amateur house flipper I dealt with in the estate liquidation business. The kind of guy who watched a few reality television shows and thought he was a real estate mogul ready to destroy historic architecture for a quick profit. "Whoa, easy there, crazy lady," he said, stepping into my path and holding up his hands. "You cannot be in here. This is an active construction site." "This is my property," I snarled, trying to push past him to get to the kitchen. "I need to get my personal belongings right now." He shoved me back hard. My weakened legs gave out, and I hit the dusty floor, scraping my palms against the exposed floorboards. Harrison rushed in behind me, grabbing the flipper by the collar. "Touch my client again and you will be eating your meals through a straw," Harrison growled. The flipper yanked himself free, dusting off his shirt with an exaggerated eye roll. "Client," he scoffed, looking down at me on the floor. "Is that what you call this broke lunatic?" "Look, lady, your parents already warned me you might show up throwing a tantrum. They sold this place to me free and clear 4 days ago. Cash deal, fast close. So get out before I call the cops for trespassing." I slowly stood up, brushing the drywall dust off my borrowed hoodie. "My parents had no legal right to sell this property," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. "You bought a stolen house." The flipper let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that echoed in the gutted room. "Sure I did. Listen, your mother told me all about you. You are bankrupt. You have no husband, no kids, and zero financial sense. She said you begged them to bail you out of your massive debt, so they sold this dump to cover your liabilities and save your sister IVF fund. Honestly, you should be thanking them. They gave me a steep discount just to get this toxic asset off their hands quickly. They said you were a complete failure who hoarded old junk. Old junk. My fists clenched so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I was a high-end estate liquidator. I handled multi-million-dollar asset distributions for elite clients. I knew the exact value of every single fiber of this house. My eyes darted past his smug face, scanning the destruction. The living room was entirely gutted. The dining room walls were stripped to the studs. But then my gaze landed on the kitchen. The open concept island was smashed to pieces, but the back wall, the one covered in imported Italian subway tiles, stood completely untouched. The contractors had demolished everything around it, but left that specific partition perfectly intact. I knew exactly why. That wall was not standard drywall. Underneath those decorative tiles was a heat-resistant reinforced titanium steel core. I had it custom installed specifically to house the biometric vault. Standard sledgehammers would simply bounce right off it, sending shockwaves up the arms of anyone stupid enough to strike it. Just as I noticed it, a heavy-set contractor walked into the kitchen, carrying a massive industrial pneumatic demolition hammer. He adjusted his safety goggles, planted his boots firmly on the floor, and aimed the heavy steel bit directly at the center of the tiled wall, the exact spot where the biometric scanner was hidden. If that pneumatic drill breached the outer casing, it could trigger the secondary lockdown protocol, permanently sealing the vault and the $4 million worth of client assets inside. My heart stopped. I lunged forward, shoving the arrogant flipper out of my way with a sudden burst of adrenaline. "Wait!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the dusty air like a siren. "Do not touch that wall!" The contractor paused the heavy drill, hovering just inches from the tiles. The flipper crossed his arms, glaring at me. "Why should he stop?" he demanded. "I own this place. Tear it down, boys." I turned to the flipper, my eyes blazing with calculated, terrifying intensity. Because that specific wall has a highly concentrated toxic asbestos core, I lied without missing a beat. My company sealed it 5 years ago. You strike that wall with a pneumatic drill, and you will release a lethal cloud of carcinogens directly into this neighborhood. You will not just face millions in environmental cleanup fines. You will go straight to federal prison for hazardous endangerment. The heavy-set contractor immediately dropped the demolition hammer, taking 3 massive steps back from the tiles. The smug grin on the flipper face vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. The flipper stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. He pulled his mirrored sunglasses down, gripping his cell phone with trembling fingers. "Asbestos," he stammered. "Are you out of your mind?" "I did not authorize hazardous material removal. I am not eating a federal cleanup fine for this dump." He waved frantically at the heavy-set contractor who was already backing away from the wall like it was rigged with explosives. "Get outside," the flipper yelled at his crew. "Everybody out right now. I am calling the city inspector and my environmental guy. If she is lying, I am suing her for delaying my project." He stormed out the front door, dialing his phone furiously with the contractors scrambling out right behind him, leaving a cloud of drywall dust in their wake. Harrison immediately stepped into the entryway, crossing his muscular arms and blocking the front door to ensure they stayed out. "You have exactly 3 minutes," Matty Harrison called out over his shoulder, keeping his eyes on the driveway. "Make it fast before that idiot realizes you bluffed him." I did not waste a single second. I scrambled over the shattered remains of my custom kitchen island, ignoring the sharp sting of broken marble slicing through my hospital socks. I marched straight toward the pristine tiled wall underneath the heavy stainless steel range hood. To anyone else, it looked like a standard high-end backsplash. To me, it was the gateway to my survival. I reached my hand up under the lip of the heavy ventilation hood, tracing my fingers along the cold metal until I found the small hidden indentation. I pressed the inside of my left wrist directly against the concealed biometric scanner. A tiny electronic beep echoed, followed by the deep mechanical hum of heavy gears turning. The grout lines between the subway tiles split perfectly down the middle. The walls separated, sliding smoothly and silently along hidden internal tracks, revealing a heavy vault door made of blast-resistant steel. I gripped the chrome handle, spun it, and pulled open the heavy door to the climate-controlled sanctuary I had custom-built for my business. The air inside the vault was perfectly chilled and smelled of leather and polished metal. The interior was completely untouched by the chaos and destruction of the house. I flipped the lighting switch, illuminating the secure shelves. My personal safety net sat on the bottom rack exactly where I left it. $2 million in banded cash and certified gold bars stacked with meticulous precision. It was the emergency fund I had built over a decade of ruthless negotiations and flawless estate liquidations. But my personal wealth was not the main reason my heart was hammering in my chest. I looked to the top shelf where a series of velvet-lined mahogany display cases rested securely. I popped the latch on the largest case and let out a long, sharp breath of relief. Nestled inside on silk cushions was a pristine collection of vintage Patek Philippe watches. Grand Complications perpetual calendars, and minute repeaters spanning 5 decades of horological mastery. They belonged to an eccentric billionaire client who had entrusted them to my firm for a highly confidential authentication and liquidation process. The entire collection was valued at $4 million. If that arrogant house flipper or my greedy parents had managed to breach this vault and sell these pieces to a pawnshop, it would not just be a family dispute, it would be a catastrophic federal crime. Stealing and fencing $4 million of a billionaire entrusted assets across state lines was a guaranteed one-way ticket to federal prison for everyone involved. The trap was set perfectly, but I needed the final piece of the puzzle. I moved to the back of the vault where a sleek black security terminal hummed quietly. I had installed hidden high-definition cameras directly into the kitchen lighting fixtures, feeding straight to this encrypted local hard drive. I tapped the keyboard, bringing the monitor to life, and navigated to the surveillance archives. I pulled up the exact date and time of my medical emergency 3 weeks ago. My fingers trembled slightly as I hit play. The high-resolution color video filled the screen. I watched myself standing at the kitchen island, sipping a glass of water after coming home from that seafood lunch. I watched the exact moment the anaphylactic shock hit. On screen, I dropped the glass, shattering it across the floor. I grabbed my throat, my face turning a terrifying shade of purple as my airway swelled shut. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air, writhing in absolute agony. Then the front door opened in the video. Cynthia and Richard walked in. I watched my own mother and father stop in the kitchen, looking down at their eldest daughter suffocating on the floor. But they did not reach for their phones to call an ambulance. Cynthia did not scream for help. Instead, she calmly turned to the front door and waved someone inside. A sleazy-looking man with a briefcase scurried into the frame. A fake notary public. Richard quickly pulled a stack of legal documents from the briefcase. The power of attorney forms and the deed transfer papers. I watched in cold, paralyzed horror as my father knelt next to my convulsing body. While I was actively dying, choking on my own swollen throat, Richard grabbed my flaccid hand. He aggressively pressed my thumb onto an ink pad and then forced my thumbprint onto the signature lines of every single document. Cynthia stood over us, pointing to the exact spots that needed authorization, her face completely devoid of any maternal concern. They waited until the ink was dry. They waited until the fake notary packed up his briefcase and scurried out the back door. Only then, after they had successfully stolen my entire life and secured my assets for Savannah and Andre, did Cynthia finally pick up her phone and dial for emergency services. I paused the video right on Cynthia's face. The cold realization washed over me, freezing the last remaining ounce of familial love I had left in my heart. This was not just a greedy real estate theft. They had intentionally delayed my medical rescue to orchestrate a massive financial fraud. It was attempted murder disguised as a tragic accident. I pulled a secure flash drive from the desk and downloaded the entire video file along with the high-resolution screenshots of the fake notary face and the forged documents. I slipped the drive into my hoodie pocket and closed the vault, sealing the titanium door until the tiles locked seamlessly back into place. When I stepped out of the kitchen, Harrison was still blocking the front door. He took one look at my face and knew everything had changed. "We are not just suing them, Harrison," I said, my voice echoing with a dark, lethal promise. "I have the security footage. They forced my thumbprint on the deed while I was suffocating on the floor before they even called the paramedics. They are going to lose everything they have ever loved, and then they are going to rot in a federal cell. Call the FBI. It is time to start the hunt." Harrison stared at the flash drive in my hand, his sharp, legal mind already racing steps ahead. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. "I am calling the county judge right now," he said, his thumb hovering over his contacts. "We can file an emergency injunction before the courthouse closes. We freeze the title transfer, serve your parents with a civil suit for the forged deed, and drag that flipper into a deposition by Tuesday morning. You will have your house back by the end of the month and your money returned." I reached out and pushed his phone down. "No," I said flatly. Harrison frowned, clearly confused. "Madison, they forged your signature while you were dying. If we do not freeze that asset transfer immediately, they are going to launder that cash through Andre and his crypto accounts. Once it hits the blockchain, retrieving it becomes an absolute nightmare." "I do not want the money back right now," I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Civil court is for property disputes and breach of contract. Civil court means settlements, mediations, and slap-on-the-wrist fines. If I sue them civilly, my mother will just cry in front of a judge, claim she was a desperate parent trying to pay medical bills, and my father will play the confused old man. They might get probation. Savannah will play the victim. Andre will declare bankruptcy and walk away scot-free. That is not enough. I want them utterly destroyed." I stepped closer to him, letting the absolute zero temperature of my anger radiate. "You are thinking like a local attorney, Harrison. You need to think like an estate liquidator. When I assess an asset, I look at the maximum possible yield. Right now, my family has handed me the highest yield of criminal charges imaginable. We are elevating this directly to the federal level." Harrison narrowed his eyes, catching on to my shift in strategy. "Explain." "They did not just sell a residential property," I told him, pacing the dusty floor of my ruined kitchen. "First, they sold a property owned by an incorporated entity, Apex Estate, LLC. They forged the signature of a corporate officer. That is corporate fraud. Second, the buyer wired $1.2 million across state lines to close the deal in 4 days. Because my parents used a forged power of attorney to authorize a fraudulent interstate bank wire, they committed federal wire fraud. Each count carries up to 20 years. I pointed to the pristine subway tile wall hiding the vault. But here is the real kill shot. Inside that vault sits a $4 million collection of vintage Patek Philippe watches belonging to a billionaire client based in New York. My firm was legally entrusted with those assets for cross-border liquidation. By selling this house with those watches sealed inside, my parents and Andre did not just steal my personal savings. They technically seized and attempted to fence $4 million of entrusted billionaire assets. That is grand larceny on a massive scale. That crosses the threshold into the direct jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Harrison let out a slow breath, realizing the magnitude of the trap they had walked into. The FBI does not play around with wire fraud or the theft of high-net-worth assets. They will seize every single account tied to your parents and Andre. They will treat this as a coordinated criminal syndicate. "Exactly," I said, a cruel smile forming on my lips. "Andre thinks he is a financial genius because he took my cash to cover his margin calls. But the second the FBI traces that stolen money to his trading accounts, the Securities and Exchange Commission will freeze his entire portfolio. He will be investigated for money laundering. Savannah will have her designer bags confiscated as proceeds of a crime. My mother will have her credit cards declined at her precious country club. I want them to spend a few days living the high life. I want them to post their expensive dinners online. I want them to feel invincible. And then I want the federal government to kick their front door off its hinges. Harrison nodded, a predatory grin matching mine. I will start drafting the dossier for the federal prosecutor immediately. We bypass the local police entirely. We hand the feds a fully wrapped package with a bow on top. But what about the house flipper? If he keeps drilling, he might actually breach the vault before the feds arrive. He will not breach it, I assured him. The titanium core requires industrial plasma cutters to penetrate. But we do need him to discover it. We need him to realize he bought a stolen house with a vault he cannot open. His panic will add another layer of criminal liability to my parents. The more he screams at them for his money back, the more chaotic their digital footprint will become. I walked back over to the hidden door. I tapped my wrist against the biometric scanner one more time. The heavy steel door slid shut, locking with a resounding metallic thud that shook the floorboards. The tiles aligned perfectly, hiding the seam. But this time, I did not leave it flawless. I grabbed a heavy steel crowbar that one of the contractors had left on the floor. I swung it hard, smashing the edge of the marble countertop right next to the secret wall. The impact sent a jagged crack running up the side of the drywall, slightly exposing the gleaming edge of the titanium casing beneath the decorative subway tiles. It was a tiny flaw, but to a greedy house flipper looking to tear down walls for an open concept layout, it would look like a structural anomaly. I blew the dust off my hands and tossed the crowbar aside. I left a breadcrumb, I told Harrison, my eyes cold and dead. That arrogant flipper is going to come back tomorrow with a city inspector to prove I was lying about the asbestos. When he realizes the air is clean, he will order his guys to resume demolition. They will hit that exposed titanium edge. They will realize there is a massive hidden safe inside the house they just bought. And being the greedy amateur he is, he will try to break into it, triggering my secondary silent alarm directly to the local police and the FBI field office. Harrison shook his head in absolute disbelief. You are terrifying, Madison. Remind me never to cross you. Let us get out of here, I said, pulling the hood of my oversized sweatshirt over my head. I have a federal trap to set, and my parents have a lot of stolen money to spend before the cage snaps shut. Harrison dropped me off at a roadside motel on the absolute outskirts of the city. He paid in cash for a room that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and cheap industrial bleach. It was a jarring, aggressive transition from the pristine, imported Italian marble of my stolen house, but right now, this dingy space was my temporary war room. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, pulling my laptop from the leather bag Harrison had managed to salvage from his office for me. The wireless internet connection was practically non-existent, so I tethered the laptop to the burner phone he had purchased on the way here. My fingers danced across the keyboard. As I logged into a ghost social media account I kept specifically for conducting background checks on my high-net-worth clients. Today, however, my target was my own blood. I typed Savannah into the search bar. Of course she was broadcasting live. She always was. The screen loaded and my sister filled the display. She was practically glowing, her blonde hair freshly blown out into perfect waves, wearing a silk designer blouse that definitely cost more than my current motel room. She was squealing into the camera, surrounded by a sea of vibrant orange boxes on a large mahogany table. Guys, you will not believe what Andre just surprised me with. Savannah shrieked to her hundreds of followers, holding her hand over her mouth in an exaggerated display of shock. She carefully pulled a massive fabric dust bag from the largest box on the table. A genuine Hermes Birkin. Togo leather in gold with palladium hardware. It is my push present for our upcoming IVF journey. Before Savannah could even finish showing off the meticulous stitching to her audience, my mother Cynthia pushed her way into the frame. She was holding a martini glass in one hand and a set of shiny black car keys in the other. Do not forget who upgraded their ride today, Cynthia announced, holding the keys right up to the camera lens so the iconic Porsche crest caught the light perfectly. A brand new Panamera. We are finally putting the dark times behind us and focusing on family blessings. I watched my mother sip her drink, her eyes crinkling with absolute joy. There was no trace of a woman mourning her eldest daughter, who was supposed to be dying on a ventilator just a few miles away in the intensive care unit. They were not just spending my money, they were actively celebrating my erasure. The camera shifted abruptly as a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man walked into the frame, wrapping a heavy arm tightly around Savannah's waist. Andre. My brother-in-law wore a custom-fitted linen suit that screamed loud new money and a smug expression that instantly made my jaw clench. He leaned into the camera holding up a glass of expensive amber scotch, swirling the ice cubes with a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist. "You have to know when to strike," Andre bragged, his voice dripping with that unbearable finance bro arrogance. Everybody else was panicking in the market this week. Everybody was crying online about the crypto winter and liquidations. But true sharks do not panic. We smell blood in the water and we buy the dip. It is all about that alpha mindset. You leverage your assets you hold with diamond hands, and you take absolute control of your financial destiny. I just injected massive liquidity into my portfolio when the weak hands were selling, and now we are reaping the rewards. Generational wealth is built in the bear market, baby. I stared at the glowing screen, letting out a dark, hollow laugh that bounced off the cheap motel walls. Generational wealth. Alpha mindset. What a pathetic, disgusting joke. I knew exactly what Andre's portfolio looked like because I had paid a private investigator to look into his trading firm months ago when he first begged me for a personal loan. Andre was not a shark. He was a degenerate gambler playing with highly leveraged cryptocurrency trades. He had been hit with a catastrophic margin call last week. His brokers were actively threatening to liquidate his entire underwater position and sue him for the massive negative balance. He did not buy the dip. He stole my $1.2 million house, liquidated it for cheap, fast cash, and pumped my entire life savings into his failing trading accounts just to avoid personal bankruptcy and federal scrutiny. He was parading around pretending to be a self-made titan of industry, using the exact money he stole while I was actively suffocating on a hospital floor. The camera panned around the room as Savannah turned to show off her new designer bag to someone sitting off-screen. For a fraction of a second, the background came into perfect, sharp focus. I recognized the distinctive hand-painted emerald wallpaper, the arched mahogany doorways, and the massive crystal chandelier hanging heavily in the center of the room. They were not celebrating at home. They were in the exclusive private dining room of the Oakmont Country Club, the most pretentious and expensive establishment in the entire state. It was a place where my mother had spent her entire adult life, desperately trying to impress the local elite. They were currently sitting there, surrounded by their wealthy friends and Andre business partners, spinning an elaborate fairy tale about his brilliant investments and their family's sudden influx of righteous cash. They were completely intoxicated by their own lies, feeling entirely untouchable and vastly superior. I looked down at my wrinkled hospital scrub pants and the oversized gray hoodie Harrison had given me. I looked like a vagrant. I looked exactly like the broken, bankrupt failure my mother had always told her country club friends I was. I slammed my laptop shut, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet room. Perfect. There is absolutely no better time to destroy a fraudulent facade than when the spotlight is shining its brightest. I grabbed the spare car keys Harrison had left on the nightstand. I was going to crash their little victory party, and I was going to do it right now while they were at the absolute peak of their delusion. I parked Harrison's spare vehicle directly in the VIP valet zone of the Oakmont Country Club, ignoring the shouting attendants in their crisp white uniforms. I stepped out of the car, and the stark contrast was almost comical. Here I was standing in front of the most exclusive establishment in the state, wearing wrinkled hospital scrub pants and a stained, oversized gray hoodie. The soles of my cheap hospital socks were still caked with the drywall dust from my gutted house. I looked like a ghost that had crawled out of a dumpster, but my posture was pure steel. I pushed through the heavy mahogany front doors. The maitre d' stepped directly into my path, holding up a hand. "Ma'am, you cannot be in here." He started, his eyes sweeping over my disheveled appearance with utter disgust. There is a strict dress code. I did not even break my stride. I shoved past him, ignoring his frantic calls for security, and marched straight toward the main dining room. The sound of a live string quartet and the low hum of wealthy patrons discussing stock portfolios filled the air. I turned the corner, and there they were. My family had commandeered the largest table in the center of the room. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over their lavish spread of expensive seafood towers and vintage champagne. Cynthia was holding court, laughing loudly at something a woman draped in diamonds had just said. Andre sat at the head of the table next to my father, his custom linen suit immaculate as he gestured expansively with a cigar. Savannah was busy posing for a photo with her brand new Hermes bag, carefully positioning the logo toward the camera lens. They looked flawless. They looked untouchable. I walked right up to the edge of their table. The heavy silence that rippled outward from my presence was instantaneous. The wealthy guests at the neighboring tables stopped eating. The string quartet seemed to falter on a note. Cynthia looked up and the champagne glass actually slipped from her fingers, hitting the pristine white tablecloth and shattering. The dark liquid soaked into the fabric like blood. "Maddie," she gasped, her face turning the color of ash. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, taking in the stares of her precious country club friends. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be in a hospital bed." Andre dropped his cigar, his smug finance bro facade cracking for a fraction of a second before morphing into deep hostility. Savannah scrambled backward, clutching her orange designer box, as if I was carrying a highly contagious disease. But it was Richard who reacted first. My father, always desperate to control the narrative and protect his fragile social standing, stood up abruptly. His chair scraped violently against the polished hardwood floor. His face was a mask of sheer panic mixed with absolute rage. He looked around at the murmuring crowd of investors and local elites, realizing his perfectly crafted illusion of the wealthy, successful patriarch was crumbling by the second. He reached a trembling hand inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek leather money clip. With aggressive, jerky movements, he peeled off a crisp $500 bill. He did not hand it to me. He crumpled it slightly and threw it directly at my chest. The bill hit my oversized hoodie and fluttered to the floor, landing right next to my dust-covered hospital socks. "Take this money and go rent a cheap motel room," Richard hissed, his voice low but carrying a vicious venom that echoed in the deadly quiet dining room. "Do not embarrass this family any further. We have guests. We have important business partners here. You have no right to walk into this establishment looking like a homeless vagrant and ruin our celebration." I did not flinch. I did not look down at the money. I kept my eyes locked entirely on his sweating face. "You are just a single junk peddler." Richard continued, his tone dripping with absolute contempt, doubling down on his cruelty to justify his theft to the watching crowd. "You dig through dead people garbage for a living. You have no husband to provide for you. You have no legacy. You do not understand how real wealth works. Money in your hands just rots anyway. We put those assets to actual use. We secured a future for your sister. Now take that cash and get out of our sight before I have you arrested for harassment." The sheer audacity of his words hung in the air. The surrounding diners literally gasped. The entire room was boiling with silent shock at the utter humiliation playing out before them. A father throwing cash at his sickly-looking daughter, calling her a junk peddler in front of high society. Savannah recovered from her initial shock, emboldened by our father's cruelty. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the tension. She crossed her arms, her new diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. "You heard him," Maddie Savannah sneered, her voice dripping with venomous entitlement. "You are ruining my push-present celebration. You always have to make everything about you." She turned her head and snapped her fingers at the two large security guards who had just arrived at the entrance of the dining room. "Guards, remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing and harassing paying members." The two men in dark suits stepped forward, reaching for my arms. I did not fight them. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. And I absolutely did not look down at the $500 bill resting on the floor. I just stood there perfectly still. I locked eyes with Richard, then with Cynthia, and finally with Andre. I let the absolute zero temperature of my gaze pierce right through their fake designer clothes and their stolen champagne. I gave them a look so devoid of humanity, so completely dead and predatory, that Richard actually took an involuntary step backward, bumping into his chair. I did not need to say a single word. The silence was my weapon. I turned on my heel, the dust from my socks leaving a faint gray footprint right next to the crumpled bill, and walked out of the dining room with my head held high. They thought they had won. They thought they had humiliated me into submission. They had no idea I was just setting the stage. Let them enjoy their appetizers. The main course was coming and it was going to choke them. The cool evening air was a sharp contrast to the suffocating luxury of the dining room. I kept my pace steady and my spine perfectly straight. My bare feet inside the thin hospital socks felt every sharp pebble on the pristine asphalt of the parking lot, but I absolutely refused to show a single ounce of physical weakness. I was almost at Harrison-parked SUV when the heavy, pungent scent of a Cuban cigar rolled over me. "Hold up, Maddie." The deep, arrogant voice echoed across the quiet lot. I stopped and turned slowly. Andre stepped out from the shadows of a massive landscaped oak tree. He took a long, slow drag from his cigar and blew the thick gray smoke deliberately into the space between us. He walked with that exaggerated, insufferable swagger of a man who believed he owned the entire world. He reached the SUV before I did and leaned his large frame against the driver's side door, completely blocking my entry. He looked me up and down, taking in my oversized hoodie and hospital pants. A cruel, condescending smirk played on his lips. "Do not hate me, Maddie," Andre said, his voice dripping with a toxic, patronizing superiority. "You are taking this whole thing way too personally. You need to detach your emotions and look at the bigger picture. It is just business." I stared at him. The absolute audacity of this man was almost clinical. He had stolen my entire life while I was suffocating on a hospital floor, and he was standing here in a custom linen suit calling it business. "You see, your problem is that you think small." Andre continued gesturing with his cigar, as if he was delivering a keynote speech at a financial seminar. "You hoard your little pennies. You sit in that boring house. You wipe dust off dead people's antique chairs, and you call that a career. But money in the hands of someone like you is just stagnant. It is a dead asset. It does nothing. I am a visionary, Maddie. I see liquidity where you see a living room." I remained completely silent, letting him dig his own grave with every word he spoke. My silence only seemed to embolden him. He took another drag of his cigar, clearly intoxicated by his own delusion. "I took the cash from that pigsty of a house, and I put it to actual use," Andre bragged, leaning closer to me so I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "I pumped that 1.2 million directly into a 3 times leveraged long position. We are in a massive bull market right now. Do you even know what that means? Probably not. It means I am printing money while you are standing here crying over a piece of real estate. I am the one carrying the future of this family on my back. I am securing generational wealth for Savannah and my future kids. You are just the seed capital. Honestly, you should be honored that your boring little life finally served a higher purpose." I studied his face. Behind the arrogant finance bro vocabulary and the expensive cigar, I could see the subtle, frantic twitch in his jaw. I could see the faint sheen of cold sweat gathering at his hairline despite the cool evening breeze. He was projecting. He was desperately trying to convince himself that he was a genius investor, because the terrifying truth was that he was nothing more than a degenerate gambler playing with stolen funds. He viewed the financial destruction of a woman as a highly strategic market move. He truly believed that stealing my hard-earned wealth to cover his catastrophic margin calls made him an alpha male provider. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Andre frowned, clearly disappointed that I was not screaming or crying. He wanted a hysterical woman he could easily dismiss. Instead, He was facing a brick wall of absolute zero temperature. "Just accept reality, Maddie," he sneered, pushing himself off the car door and stepping aside. "Go find a cheap apartment. Go back to polishing your little teacups. Leave the high-level financial maneuvering to the men who actually know how to run the world." I looked at him one last time. I did not yell. I did not slap his smug face. I did not threaten him with lawsuits or police. I simply smiled. It was a terrifying razor-sharp curve of my lips that did not reach my eyes. "I hope your bull market lasts through the night, Andre," I said, my voice soft and lethal. His frown deepened, a flicker of genuine unease finally breaking through his arrogant facade. He opened his mouth to reply, but I had already turned my back on him. I pulled the heavy car door open, climbed into the passenger seat, and slammed it shut, locking it instantly. Through the tinted glass, I watched him stand in the parking lot for a moment, staring at the vehicle, before he finally shook his head, took another puff of his cigar, and turned to walk back toward the country club. I did not waste a single second. I reached into the leather bag on the floorboard and pulled out my laptop. I flipped the screen open, the bright white light illuminating the dark interior of the SUV. My fingers flew across the keyboard with punishing speed. I connected to the secure mobile hotspot and opened my encrypted email client. I created a new message. In the recipient line, I typed the direct email address for the local Federal Bureau of Investigation field office, specifically targeting the white-collar crime and financial fraud division. I did not write a long emotional plea. I kept it entirely professional and devastatingly precise. I attached the high-definition security video of Cynthia and Richard forcing my thumbprint onto the forged power of attorney documents while I was convulsing on the floor. I attached the clear screenshots of the fake notary public. I attached the bank routing numbers for the fraudulent wire transfer. And finally, I attached a formal declaration identifying the $4 million Patek Philippe watch collection currently sealed inside the property they had just sold across state lines. I reviewed the attachments one last time. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a perfectly wrapped package of federal felonies: corporate fraud, title theft, wire fraud, grand larceny. And now, thanks to Andre's arrogant little speech in the parking lot, I knew exactly where the stolen cash was sitting. It was fully integrated into his highly leveraged cryptocurrency portfolios, meaning the Securities and Exchange Commission would immediately flag him for massive-scale money laundering. I stared at the screen, taking a slow, deep breath. They wanted to play high-level financial maneuvering. They wanted to strip me down to nothing and dance on my ashes. They had severely underestimated the kind of monster they created when they left me for dead. I moved the cursor over the blue button on the screen. With one sharp, decisive tap of my finger, I hit send. The progress bar flashed across the top of the screen and vanished. The dossier was gone. It was in the hands of the federal government now. There was no undoing it. There were no take-backs. The absolute destruction of my family had officially begun. I closed the laptop, placing it carefully on the passenger seat. I leaned my head against the cool leather headrest and closed my eyes, waiting for Harrison to return to the car so we could watch the entire empire burn to the ground. Harrison finally returned to the SUV, tossing his keys into the center console. He took one look at my face, illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen, and knew the payload had been delivered. He put the car in gear and drove us straight to his downtown law firm. The city streets blurred past the tinted windows. The federal machinery was officially in motion, but the FBI moved at its own methodical pace. I needed an immediate catalyst to force their hand to turn a white-collar paper trail into an active crime scene. I needed the final domino to fall. Miles away in the quiet suburban darkness of my stolen neighborhood, the catalyst was already making his move. The arrogant house flipper had dismissed his construction crew for the night after my asbestos threat, but greed is a powerful motivator. It gnaws at the brain. He could not sleep. He could not stop thinking about the bizarre encounter in the gutted living room and the pristine, untouched subway tile wall behind the kitchen range. He had driven back to the property alone, his mirrored sunglasses replaced by a heavy flashlight. He stepped over the shattered remains of my custom island, the beam of his light cutting through the settling drywall dust. He walked straight to the kitchen wall. He shined the flashlight directly onto the jagged crack I had intentionally created with the steel crowbar earlier that day. He leaned in close, brushing his thumb against the broken drywall edge. Through the narrow fissure, the beam of light caught the unmistakable dull gray gleam of a solid metallic surface, hiding just beneath the decorative tiles. It was not a pipe. It was not a standard structural beam. It was a massive, continuous sheet of solid metal, perfectly integrated into the foundation of the house. His heart began to pound with the intoxicating thrill of a treasure hunter. He convinced himself that my parents had sold him a property containing a hidden safe. He imagined stacks of forgotten cash or vintage jewelry abandoned by the bankrupt daughter they had described. The threat of hazardous materials vanished from his mind entirely, replaced by the overwhelming urge to crack open whatever was hiding behind that false wall. He walked out to his heavy-duty work truck and retrieved a commercial-grade rotary hammer drill equipped with a diamond-tipped masonry bit designed to chew through solid concrete. He marched back into the dark kitchen, plugging the heavy drill into a portable generator. He planted his boots firmly on the dusty floorboards, adjusted his grip and aimed the vicious diamond-tipped bit directly at the exposed metal edge visible through the crack. He squeezed the trigger. The drill roared to life, echoing violently in the empty, hollowed-out house. The spinning masonry bit chewed instantly through the ceramic subway tile and the layer of thin-set mortar, sending a shower of white dust into the air. But the exact second the diamond tip struck the hidden titanium alloy core of the vault, a shower of bright orange sparks erupted. The drill bit screamed, emitting a high-pitched metallic screech as it violently ground against the impenetrable military-grade steel. The sheer force of the impact violently jerked the heavy tool backward, nearly twisting the flipper wrists out of their sockets. He cursed, stepping back and dropping the drill to the floor. He rubbed his aching arms, staring at the shallow dent in the metal. He had absolutely no idea what he had just done. Inside the house, nothing happened. No deafening sirens wailed. No flashing strobe lights illuminated the dark windows. The quiet suburban street remained perfectly undisturbed. The flipper assumed he had just hit a stubborn reinforcement plate. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, completely unaware that the house was now a digitally armed trap. The vault security system was not designed to scare off common burglars with loud noises. It was designed to protect millions of dollars in highly classified and trusted assets. The moment the vibration sensors detected the specific frequency of a high-impact drill against the titanium outer shell, the primary countermeasure engaged automatically. It was a Level 1 silent alarm protocol. The internal computer instantly bypassed the local internet network, utilizing a dedicated encrypted cellular uplink to transmit a distress signal. The silent alarm fired a high-priority digital distress beacon directly to two very specific locations simultaneously. The first was the emergency dispatch center of the local police headquarters, flagging an active breach of a high-value commercial vault. The second destination was my personal encrypted server. I was sitting in the corner of Harrison downtown office, completely enveloped in the leather of a large guest chair. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. Harrison was at his massive mahogany desk, sorting through the civil injunction paperwork, preparing the secondary strike for the moment the federal agents made their move. The office was quiet, the only sound being the rustle of legal documents and the distant hum of the city traffic below. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. My laptop screen, sitting on the glass coffee table in front of me, erupted. The display shifted from the standard desktop background to a blinding, flashing blood-red screen. A solid black warning box materialized in the center of the monitor, displaying a scrolling stream of coordinates and a blaring text notification. Unauthorized breach detected. Kitchen vault exterior. Level 1. Silent alarm engaged. Law enforcement dispatch initiated. The red light bathed the dark office in a harsh crimson glow. Harrison stopped writing his pen, hovering over the legal pad. He looked up at the flashing screen, his eyes widening as he realized exactly what was happening. The trap had been sprung. The greedy flipper had taken the bait and initiated an active crime scene right on top of my parents' fraudulent sale. The local police were already mobilizing heavily armed units to respond to a high-value vault breach at a property my parents had illegally transferred across state lines. The collision of local law enforcement and federal jurisdiction was about to create an inescapable nightmare for my family. I slowly closed the file folder I was reading. I set it down on the table with deliberate precision. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles out of my borrowed gray hoodie. I looked at the flashing red screen, and then I looked directly at Harrison. I felt the final piece of my old self completely die, replaced entirely by a cold, untouchable force of sheer destruction. "Let us go hunting," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "The game is over." The morning sun sliced through the shattered living room windows, illuminating a thick cloud of pulverized drywall. The arrogant house flipper was covered in white powder sweat pouring down his face as he violently swung a heavy sledgehammer against the exposed titanium edge of my hidden vault. He had been at it for hours, completely obsessed, driven by the frantic greed of unearthing a secret payday. His breathing was ragged, his muscles shaking from exhaustion, but he refused to stop. He raised the heavy steel hammer for another strike, entirely oblivious to the armada of tactical vehicles currently swarming my quiet suburban street. The screech of heavy tires tearing across the pavement was the only warning he got. 6 matte black sport utility vehicles surrounded the property, blocking every possible exit. Before the flipper could even lower his hammer, the front door was kicked off its hinges. A dozen heavily armed federal agents in tactical gear flooded the foyer alongside local police officers. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," an agent roared, his weapon raised. "Drop the hammer right now and put your hands behind your head." The flipper froze in absolute shock. The heavy sledgehammer slipped from his trembling hands and crashed onto the floorboards. He fell to his knees as 2 agents swiftly closed the distance, forcing him down and securing his wrists with heavy-duty zip ties. Harrison and I stepped out of our vehicle, parked safely behind the barricade of federal cruisers. The cool morning air felt incredibly crisp. I adjusted the hood of my gray sweatshirt and walked up the driveway with the measured, confident stride of a corporate executive inspecting an acquisition. I stepped over the splintered remains of my front door and walked straight into the kitchen. The flipper looked up from the floor, his mirrored sunglasses knocked askew, his face a mask of absolute terrified confusion. He saw me and his eyes widened. "What is going on here?" the flipper screamed, thrashing against the zip ties. "You cannot do this. I own this property. I bought it fair and square. I paid $1.2 million in cold hard cash to Richard and Cynthia. I have the deed. This crazy woman is trespassing." I did not even look at him. I walked past his kneeling form and inspected the shallow scratch marks on my titanium vault door. He had barely made a dent. I turned around, pulling a crisp, pristine stack of legal documents from the leather folder Harrison handed to me. "You did not buy a house?" I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the gutted room. "You bought a stolen federal crime scene." Harrison stepped forward, slamming a massive binder of corporate filings down onto a dust-covered sawhorse right in front of the kneeling man. The loud thud made the flipper flinch. "That transaction is completely void," Harrison declared with the lethal precision of a shark smelling blood in the water. "You did not purchase this property from Richard and Cynthia. You attempted to purchase an asset owned exclusively by Apex Estate, LLC, a corporate entity that requires the direct authorized signature of its chief executive officer to execute any transfer of title. You bypassed standard escrow procedures for a fast cash close and accepted a forged medical power of attorney. You just wired $1.2 million to an unauthorized third party to purchase a stolen corporate asset." The flipper face drained of the little color it had left. The arrogant swagger from yesterday evaporated entirely, replaced by the sickening realization of total financial ruin. "But the notary," the flipper stammered, his voice cracking. "The notary stamped it. They said she was on life support. They said the family was liquidating to cover debts. The notary was a fake Harrison cut in sharply. And what you failed to realize in your greedy rush to flip this property is that you also took unauthorized possession of a highly secure vault containing $4 million of entrusted billionaire assets. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is here because you are now a prime suspect in an interstate grand larceny and wire fraud syndicate. The reality of the situation crushed the flipper like a physical weight. $1.2 million in cash. Gone. His entire operating budget for the year vanished into thin air. And now he was facing federal prison time for receiving stolen property of astronomical value. The panic in his eyes rapidly morphed into a raw, unhinged, violent rage. He thrashed against the agents holding him down, his face turning purple with absolute fury. "My money," he roared, spit flying from his lips. "They stole my money. Those lying suburban snakes took my entire liquid capital." He looked wildly at the lead federal agent. "I am a victim here," he begged, his voice cracking. "Let me call him. Let me call Richard. I want my money back right now." The federal agent glanced at Harrison, who gave a curt nod. Establishing a direct line of communication between the defrauded buyer and the sellers would perfectly lock in the wire fraud charges. The agent pulled the flipper phone from his pocket, unlocked it with his Face ID, and hit speakerphone, dialing Richard's number. The phone rang 3 times. Richard answered, his voice thick with sleep and the lingering exhaustion of expensive champagne. "Hello," Richard muttered. "Richard, you lying piece of garbage!" The flipper screamed into the phone, his voice tearing through the quiet kitchen. "The FBI is in the house. The transaction is void. You sold me a stolen corporate asset, you thief!" A sharp gasp echoed through the speaker. Richard was suddenly wide awake. "What are you talking about? The transaction is closed. We signed the papers." "You forged the papers," the flipper roared, fighting against the zip ties. "You listen to me very carefully, Richard. I am out $1.2 million in cash because of your little family scam. I want my money wired back to my account in exactly 60 minutes. Do you hear me? 60 minutes. If I do not see that wire clear, I am not waiting for the feds to arrest you. I have associates in this city, dangerous people who do not play by courtroom rules. I will send them to your fancy country club. I will send them to your house. They will butcher you and your wife and take it out of your hides. I want my money, Richard." The line went dead. Richard had hung up in sheer terror. The extortion threat was captured perfectly on the federal agent's body cameras. The flipper was hyperventilating, tears of rage streaming down his dust-covered face. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but clinical satisfaction. The first domino had successfully fallen. My father was now trapped between a federal indictment and a violent street-level debt collector. The money he had proudly stolen from his dying daughter was about to become the very thing that destroyed his life. I turned to Harrison, smoothing my gray hoodie. "The buyer has established the fraud," I said calmly. "Let us go check on my sister and her finance genius husband. I hear the crypto market is crashing today." The pristine air inside the Chanel boutique smelled of rich leather and exclusive perfumes. Cynthia stood at the VIP counter, completely intoxicated by her own delusion. She was running her manicured fingers over the textured surface of a limited edition $15,000 handbag. She lifted her chin, treating the retail associates like personal servants as she bragged loudly about her family's recent massive influx of cash. She wanted every wealthy woman in the boutique to hear that she was a woman of substantial means. "Wrap it up," Cynthia ordered with a dismissive wave of her hand, "and add the matching wallet. We are celebrating a fresh start today." She pulled a heavy metal premium credit card from her purse and dropped it onto the glass counter with an arrogant clatter. The sales associate offered a polite, practiced smile and inserted the chip into the terminal. A sharp negative beep echoed in the quiet luxury store. "I am sorry, ma'am," the associate said, her voice dropping to a discreet whisper. "The card was declined." Cynthia's face flushed with instant defensive anger. She slammed her hand against the counter. Your machine is obviously broken, she snapped, drawing the attention of several high society shoppers browsing nearby. Run it again. I have a seven-figure liquidity event currently clearing. That card has an unlimited limit. The associate ran it again. The same sharp negative beep rang out. Declined. Cynthia snatched the card back, her hands shaking with fury. She dug into her purse and threw down two different platinum cards from two different banking institutions. Try these, she hissed. The associate swiped the first. Declined. She swiped the second. Declined. The whispers from the other wealthy patrons began to ripple through the boutique. Cynthia snatched her phone from her designer bag, her face turning a violent shade of crimson. She dialed the direct line to her private wealth manager, ready to scream about the sheer incompetence of their banking systems. She expected apologies. She expected the manager to grovel. The call connected, but she did not hear her wealth manager voice. She was transferred directly to the Fraud Prevention and Compliance Department. Listen to me, Cynthia shouted right into the receiver, ignoring the staring crowd. I am trying to make a purchase, and my cards are malfunctioning. I want this fixed immediately, or I am moving my entire portfolio to a competitor. Ma'am, the voice on the other end responded with an absolute glacial detachment. We have not malfunctioned. Your accounts are no longer under our jurisdiction. As of 20 minutes ago, your entire financial portfolio, including all lines of credit checking accounts and investment profiles, has been completely frozen by a federal mandate. Frozen. Cynthia gasped, the air suddenly leaving her lungs. What do you mean, frozen? I just deposited $1.2 million in cash. That specific deposit is the exact reason for the freeze, the compliance officer stated flatly. We received a direct injunction from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are currently under active investigation for title fraud, grand larceny, and interstate wire fraud. The funds you deposited have been flagged as stolen corporate assets. You have absolutely zero access to any capital until the federal inquiry is resolved. The phone slipped from Cynthia's hand, clattering onto the marble floor of the boutique. The $15,000 handbag was gently pulled away by the sales associate. Cynthia stood entirely frozen, the terrifying reality crushing her arrogant facade into dust right in front of the local elite. Exactly 12 miles away, at the prestigious Oakmont Country Club, Richard was standing on the 18th green. He was lining up a putt holding a custom golf club while loudly boasting to three prominent local investors about his recent real estate maneuvers. He was painting himself as a ruthless negotiator who just unloaded a toxic asset for pure cash. Before he could sink the putt, a golf cart sped across the manicured grass. The club manager jumped out, looking deeply uncomfortable. Richard was annoyed at the interruption. "Sir," the manager said, his voice tight, "you need to come to the front parking lot immediately. There is a situation with your vehicle." Richard scoffed, handing his putter to his caddy. "Relax, gentlemen," he told his wealthy friends with a confident smirk. "Probably just a valet scratched the paint. I will have them buy me a new one." He marched toward the main parking area, his chest puffed out. But the smirk died the absolute second he rounded the clubhouse. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck was idling loudly in the VIP parking zone. Two men in high-visibility vests were actively securing thick metal chains around the axles of his pristine brand-new Porsche Panamera. "Hey," Richard roared, sprinting across the pavement, his face turning purple with rage. "Get your filthy hands off my car! That is a completely paid-off luxury vehicle. I will sue your entire towing company into the ground." The tow truck driver did not even flinch. He finished tightening the winch and turned to Richard, pulling a bright yellow and red carbon copy document from his clipboard. "I do not care who you sue, buddy." The driver deadpanned, shoving the paperwork directly into Richard's chest. "I do not work for a bank. I was contracted directly by federal marshals." Richard snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the bold black text. It was an asset seizure notice. The document explicitly stated that the vehicle was purchased using funds traced to an active federal wire fraud investigation. The Porsche was no longer his. It was classified as the proceeds of a federal crime. His wealthy golf partners had walked up behind him to see the commotion. They stood in stunned, judgmental silence as the tow truck engine roared to life, hoisting the beautiful Porsche into the air and dragging it away. Richard stood in the middle of the country club parking lot, clutching his useless golf club, utterly humiliated and entirely exposed as a fraud. Across the city, in a high-rise glass-walled office, the final devastating domino was about to fall. Andre sat in his leather ergonomic chair, chewing on the end of a luxury cigar. His massive desk was dominated by 6 large computer monitors, displaying real-time cryptocurrency charts and trading algorithms. He felt like an absolute god of finance. The stolen $1.2 million had been seamlessly injected into his failing margin accounts, giving him the massive liquidity he needed to keep his highly leveraged positions alive. He was certain he had outsmarted the market and outsmarted me. He leaned forward to adjust a trade on his primary screen. Suddenly, all 6 monitors flickered violently. The continuous stream of green and red market data completely vanished. The screens went pitch black for a fraction of a second before a massive bright red error message hijacked every single display. Account suspended. SEC mandate compliance lock. Andre dropped his cigar, his heart slamming against his ribs. He hammered the keyboard frantically, clicking his mouse as fast as he could. Nothing responded. He grabbed his phone to call his exchange broker, but an automated high-priority email notification chimed loudly through his desktop speakers. He clicked the notification. The email was a joint notice from his brokerage compliance team and the Securities and Exchange Commission. His breathing turned shallow and rapid as he read the text. The recent massive capital injection into his trading account had been traced by federal authorities directly to an illicit wire fraud syndicate. His entire financial portfolio was immediately frozen under the suspicion of felony money laundering. No, no, no. Andre chanted, his voice a desperate, pathetic whisper. He hit the refresh button on his secondary monitor. The lock screen vanished for a second, giving him a brief, agonizing glimpse of his live trading dashboard. The cryptocurrency market was currently experiencing a sharp, volatile dip. It was a standard market correction, something he could have easily survived if he had access to his liquid capital. But his accounts were frozen by federal order. He could not deposit more funds. He could not sell off smaller assets to cover his losses. He was entirely locked out of his own portfolio. Because his account was frozen and deeply underwater, the broker automated risk management engine kicked in. Andre watched in absolute screaming horror as the system executed a forced liquidation. Without the stolen cash to back up his massive leveraged bets, the algorithm aggressively sold off every single asset he owned at a severe loss just to cover the debt. He watched the numbers freefall. $2 million, $1 million, 0. The numbers did not stop there. The liquidation closed out, leaving a massive negative balance. He was not just wiped out. He owed the brokerage hundreds of thousands of dollars he did not have. He was officially and catastrophically bankrupt. The SEC had destroyed his career and the FBI was coming for his freedom. The mighty finance shark had just drowned in his own stolen tank. I sat in the quiet safety of Harrison downtown law firm sipping a glass of iced water. My laptop screen was a mosaic of digital destruction. I was actively monitoring the public blockchain ledgers, watching Andre's financial portfolio evaporate into a massive black hole of margin debt. It was a beautiful symphony of algorithmic liquidation. Right on cue, my burner phone began to vibrate violently across the glass coffee table. The caller identification displayed a frantic succession of incoming calls from my younger sister, Savannah. I let it ring 5 times. Let her sweat. Let her feel a fraction of the helplessness I felt while suffocating on my kitchen floor. On the 6th ring, I slowly picked up the device and tapped the green accept button, holding it to my ear without saying a single word. Maddie. Maddie, please tell me you are there. Savannah shrieked into the receiver, her voice a jagged, hysterical mess. The background noise on her end was absolute chaos. I could hear the distinct, terrifying sound of heavy glass shattering and the muffled, terrified screams of our mother. I remained completely silent, letting her desperation bleed through the speaker. "Maddie, you have to call them off!" Savannah sobbed, her breathing ragged and frantic. "You have to fix this right now!" Andre is sitting on the floor of his home office, holding his head and rocking back and forth. He is totally unresponsive. His accounts are completely gone. The federal agents seized his laptops and his passports, and Mom and Dad are under attack. "The guy who bought your house, he sent people. He sent actual thugs to the suburbs. They are outside right now throwing cinder blocks through the dining room windows. They smashed the new Porsche before the tow truck even arrived. You have to call the police and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Please, Maddie. You are driving your own flesh and blood to death." I took a slow sip of my iced water. The audacity was truly breathtaking. Even now, as her fraudulent world collapsed into a pile of shattered glass and federal indictments, Savannah was instinctively playing the ultimate victim. She was not calling to confess. She was calling to demand that I shield her from the consequences of her own felonies. "How exactly am I driving you to death?" "Savannah," I asked, my voice as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "I am simply sitting in a chair. You and your husband committed interstate wire fraud. Dad and Mom committed grand larceny. You built a house of cards on top of my grave, and now the wind is blowing." "It was just a mistake," Savannah wailed aggressively, shifting the blame exactly as our mother had taught her. "We were desperate. Andre needed liquidity to save our future." "You were in a coma, Maddie. You were not even using the house. You have always been so bitter and jealous of my life because you do not have a husband. You are doing this on purpose just to punish me for being happy. How can you be so incredibly vindictive? We are your family. We share the same blood. You are supposed to forgive us. You are supposed to be the bigger person and drop these ridiculous charges before they ruin my IVF treatments. I am supposed to be a mother. I deserve to be a mother." I closed my eyes, absorbing the sheer toxic delusion of her words. She genuinely believed that stealing my entire life savings and fencing stolen billionaire assets was just a minor family dispute that I should overlook so she could buy designer baby clothes. She viewed my existence strictly as a financial stepping stone for her own suburban fairy tale. "You want to talk about being a mother?" I said, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "You want to talk about family and blood and forgiveness?" "Yes," Savannah cried eagerly, grasping at what she thought was a shred of empathy. "Please, Maddie, just call the FBI and tell them you gave us permission. Tell them it was a corporate loan. You can fix this with one phone call. Do not ruin my chance at having a baby." I did not answer her directly. Instead, I reached out to my laptop and pulled up the encrypted audio file I had extracted from my hidden vault security interface. When I had downloaded the video of my parents forcing my thumbprint onto the forged deed, I had also downloaded the ambient audio captured by the high-definition microphones concealed inside the kitchen air vents. The microphones had continued recording long after the fake notary left, capturing the exact conversation my family had while they stood over my paralyzed, suffocating body, waiting for the ink to dry before dialing emergency services. "Listen very closely, Savannah," I instructed, leaning toward the laptop speakers. "I want you to hear exactly what kind of family you really are." I hit the spacebar. The audio file played crisp and clear over the phone line. First, there was the terrifying sound of my own ragged, gasping breath as my throat closed up. Then the sound of high heels clicking against the hardwood floor. And then Savannah's voice rang out, sharp, impatient, and utterly devoid of human empathy. "Just pull her plug and get it over with." The recorded voice of my sister echoed into the present moment, perfectly preserving her monstrous greed. "She is practically dead anyway. The doctor said her brain is starving for oxygen. We do not have time to wait for a probate court to release her funds. Andre needs the cash by Friday, and I need the money for my IVF deposit. Just sign the medical refusal and let her go so we can cash out the estate." I paused the audio track. The silence on the phone line was absolute. The sound of breaking glass in the background of Savannah End had completely stopped. She had stopped breathing. The undeniable proof of her own sociopathic cruelty had just been played back to her in ultra-high definition audio. The vault door behind the kitchen has an excellent acoustic array. Savannah, I said, breaking the dead silence with surgical precision. It picks up every single whisper within a 40-foot radius. The federal prosecutor already has the raw files. They know you actively advocated for my murder to fund your fertility treatments. Maddie Savannah finally choked out her voice a microscopic, terrified squeak. Maddie, please, that was not what I meant. I was panicked. I was not thinking straight. You were thinking perfectly straight, I corrected her. My voice hardened into unbreakable steel. You were thinking about Hermes bags and crypto margins while I was choking to death on my own floor. You wanted to play the ruthless financial shark. Well, congratulations, Savannah. You are swimming with the big fish now. Have fun doing your IVF treatments in a federal prison. I did not wait for her to scream. I did not wait for her to beg. I pressed the red button on the screen, cutting the connection instantly. I tossed the burner phone into the trash can beside the desk. The golden child had finally met the executioner, and I did not feel a single ounce of pity. The sheer delusion of the suburban elite is a fascinating psychological phenomenon. For my parents, reality was not dictated by facts or federal indictments. Reality was dictated entirely by appearances. Despite the fact that their bank accounts were frozen by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and despite the fact that violent debt collectors had hurled cinder blocks through their pristine dining room windows, Cynthia and Richard refused to cancel their annual Thanksgiving gala. In their twisted minds, canceling the party would be an admission of defeat. It would signal to the country club elites that the rumors circulating about their sudden financial collapse were true. So Cynthia simply hired a private contractor, paying him with whatever loose cash she had hidden away to board up the shattered glass. She draped heavy silk curtains over the plywood and proceeded to host 50 of the wealthiest individuals in the state, as if nothing was wrong. I knew exactly what they were doing, because Harrison had a private investigator parked half a mile down their street, intercepting the catering vans and logging the license plates of the arriving guests. They were hosting a survival hustle disguised as a holiday feast. Andre was currently pacing the floors of their opulent living room, rehearsing his pitch. I could picture him perfectly adjusting his designer tie, sweating profusely through his expensive cologne. His plan was textbook financial manipulation. He was going to corner his most lucrative investors by the fireplace, handing them glasses of premium bourbon. He would flash his charismatic smile and confidently explain that his firm was in the middle of a massive off-market corporate acquisition. He would claim his assets were temporarily tied up in a bureaucratic escrow hold, and he just needed a quick bridge loan, $500,000 in untraceable cash to secure a monumental payout. Cynthia was undoubtedly instructing Savannah to play her part perfectly. I could hear my mother voice echoing in my head, telling Savannah to wear something elegant but understated to place a protective hand over her stomach, and casually mention the astronomical costs of her upcoming fertility treatments. They were going to weaponize sympathy. They intended to milk their wealthy friends for a massive emergency fund. They needed cold, hard cash to retain high-powered criminal defense attorneys, or more likely to charter a private flight to a non-extradition country before the federal prosecutors finalized the arrest warrants. They were treating Thanksgiving dinner like a desperate venture capital pitch. They thought they could simply charm their way out of a federal crime syndicate investigation with a roasted bird and expensive wine. I sat in Harrison's office listening to the live updates from the investigator. A slow, icy smile spread across my face. They are actually going through with it, I said, my voice a low, dangerous hum. They are serving roasted turkey while the federal government sharpens the guillotine. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. The guest list is an absolute who is who of regional wealth, Harrison noted, glancing at his tablet screen. Andre invited all his heavy-hitting crypto backers, and Richard invited his golf buddies from the club. They are going to attempt a massive fundraising grift right over the cranberry sauce. We should notify the authorities to move in tonight before they secure any liquid funds. No, I said, standing up from the guest chair. The authorities will have their turn soon enough. But if the police raid the house before Andre opens his mouth, those investors will just think my family got caught up in a tragic bureaucratic misunderstanding. I want those investors to hear Andre beg. I want them to realize he is a complete fraud right to his face. I am going to crash this little dinner party myself. I walked over to the garment bag I had brought with me. I unzipped it and pulled out my absolute armor. It was a bespoke charcoal gray suit cut with razor-sharp precision tailored perfectly to my frame. I slipped into the crisp white silk shirt and fastened the dark buttons. I slid my feet into a pair of black stiletto heels that sounded like gunshots on the hardwood floor. I tied my hair back into a severe tight bun, stripping away any remaining softness. I did not look like a grieving daughter recovering from a coma. I looked like an apex predator stepping directly onto the killing floor. Harrison stood up, adjusting his own tie. "I will drive," he offered, grabbing his keys. "We are not taking your car," I replied, checking the dial of my wristwatch. Right on cue, a heavy, authoritative knock echoed through the quiet law firm. Harrison's secretary opened the heavy double doors and immediately stepped aside, eyes wide with shock. A man walked into the room, commanding the space instantly. He was in his late 60s, wearing an immaculate navy blue suit that cost more than most people earned in a full year. His silver hair was perfectly combed back, and his piercing gray eyes held the terrifying weight of absolute, ruthless power. He was not a lawyer. He was not a federal agent. He was the billionaire. He was the owner of the $4 million vintage Patek Philippe watch collection that currently sat locked inside my hidden vault. The exact collection my family had attempted to steal and fence when they sold my house to that arrogant house flipper. Madison, the billionaire, said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that demanded immediate obedience. "I received your secure message regarding the status of my assets. You informed me that a group of suburban amateurs attempted to illegally liquidate my property across state lines." I nodded, my expression completely composed, maintaining eye contact. "That is correct, sir. They forged my signature to sell the building containing your watches. They are currently hosting a lavish Thanksgiving dinner, using stolen funds, trying to raise capital to flee the jurisdiction." The billionaire adjusted his solid gold cufflinks. His jaw tightened with a subtle, terrifying fury. "I have destroyed multinational corporations for attempting to short my stock. I do not take kindly to local crypto gamblers and country club housewives laying their hands on my private collection. I understand you are heading to this dinner party to deliver a message. I confirmed. I am going to publicly dismantle their entire operation before the federal agents make the arrests." The billionaire turned toward the door, gesturing with a heavy hand. "My custom Maybach is idling downstairs with my security detail. I am coming with you. I want to look these arrogant thieves directly in the eyes when they realize exactly whose property they tried to steal." I smiled. The trap was no longer just set. It was armed with a nuclear warhead. "Let us go carve the turkey," I said. The matte black Maybach glided to a silent halt at the end of my parents' sprawling circular driveway. Through the tinted windows, I surveyed the grotesque spectacle of their desperation. Expensive luxury vehicles lined the street. Warm, golden light spilled from the front windows, where heavy silk curtains barely concealed the plywood boarding up the shattered glass from the debt collectors. They were actively celebrating their own impending doom. The billionaire did not wait for his driver to open the door. He stepped out onto the pristine pavement, adjusting his suit jacket with a terrifying calm. Harrison and I flanked him. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp autumn air fill my lungs. I was no longer the suffocating victim on a hospital floor. I was the architect of their destruction. We bypassed the valet stand entirely. I pushed open the heavy oak front doors of my childhood home. The sheer volume of the party washed over us. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand foyer. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with trays of champagne and caviar appetizers. The smell of roasted turkey and expensive truffles filled the air, masking the stench of their financial rot. In the center of the sunken living room, Andre was holding court. He stood by the massive stone fireplace, an unlit cigar in one hand and a glass of expensive bourbon in the other. He was surrounded by 5 of the wealthiest venture capitalists in the region. I could hear his booming, confident voice echoing across the room. It is all about leveraging temporary liquidity for massive permanent gains, Andre boasted, his chest puffed out in his custom linen suit. My firm is currently restructuring a monumental off-market acquisition. The capital is safely locked in a bureaucratic escrow, but the payout is going to be astronomical. I am giving you gentlemen the ground floor opportunity to bridge this minor gap and double your investment by Monday morning. I stepped down into the sunken living room, my black stiletto heels striking the hardwood floor with the sharp crack of a judge gavel. I highly doubt you will be doing any trading by Monday morning, Andre. I announced, my voice slicing cleanly through the polite chatter of the room. Unless they installed trading terminals in federal holding cells. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of conversation evaporated instantly. 50 pairs of wealthy, judgmental eyes turned to stare at me. Andre froze. The glass of bourbon in his hand tilted slightly, spilling a few amber drops onto the expensive Persian rug. His arrogant smile vanished, replaced by a sudden sickening paleness that washed over his face. Savannah, who had been standing nearby showing off her new Hermes bag, dropped her champagne flute. It shattered against the floorboards, mirroring the exact moment her fabricated reality broke. Cynthia pushed her way through the crowd of stunned investors. Her face was a mask of pure, unhinged panic mixed with furious indignation. She wore a stunning emerald green gown, a desperate attempt to project absolute control. "Security!" Cynthia shrieked, pointing a trembling manicured finger at me. "Get the valet! Get someone to throw this crazy woman out right now! She is a completely degenerate dropout. We disowned her years ago. She is mentally unstable and trying to ruin our family Thanksgiving." She turned to the shocked investors, forcing a rigid plastic smile onto her face. "Please excuse this horrific interruption, gentlemen. My estranged daughter has severe psychological issues. She is completely broke and clearly experiencing a psychotic break because she is jealous of Andre's massive success." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply stepped aside. The billionaire stepped forward from the shadows of the foyer. The temperature in the room plummeted. The sheer gravity of his presence sucked the oxygen straight out of the living room. Every single high-net-worth investor surrounding Andre instantly recognized the man standing next to me. He was a titan. He was the kind of man who could bankrupt their entire portfolios with a single phone call. "You are calling my top senior estate liquidator a crazy degenerate." The billionaire stated, his voice a low rumbling earthquake that shook the crystal glasses on the catering trays. Cynthia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She stared at him, her eyes wide with sheer terror. "You stand in this house pouring expensive champagne and begging these men for bridge loans." The billionaire continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward my mother. "You pretend to be a family of profound wealth. Yet my security team just informed me that you and your husband forged legal documents to illegally sell a house belonging to this highly respected woman. A house that currently contains $4 million of my personal vintage assets sealed inside a biometric vault." The silence that followed was absolute. It was deafening. It was the sound of an entire social empire being vaporized in real time. "You attempted to steal and fence my private property to cover the pathetic crypto gambling debts of your son-in-law," the billionaire growled, locking his steely gray eyes directly onto Andre. "And now you have the absolute audacity to stand in front of my business associates and ask them for money to fund your escape." The venture capitalists standing around Andre physically recoiled. They stepped back as if Andre had suddenly caught fire. The word stolen echoed in their minds. $4 million of a billionaire's stolen assets. The realization hit them like a freight train. Andre was not offering them a ground floor investment opportunity. He was desperately trying to make them accomplices in a massive federal money laundering scheme. One of the lead investors, an older man with silver hair, set his bourbon glass down on the mantel with a sharp, disgusted click. He glared at Andre with pure revulsion. "You tried to use our money to cover a federal grand larceny charge," the investor hissed, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You are not a shark, Andre. You are a desperate, pathetic thief. Do not ever contact my firm again." The investor turned on his heel and marched toward the front door. The other four venture capitalists immediately followed suit, grabbing their coats and abandoning their drinks. They did not just walk away. They fled. They wanted zero proximity to a man who had just stolen from a titan. Andre stood completely alone by the fireplace, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides. The charismatic finance bro facade had been entirely stripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified, broken man staring at the absolute ruins of his career. He had played his final card, and I had just set the entire deck on fire. The billionaire declaration hung in the air like thick, toxic smoke. Cynthia began to shriek, a high-pitched grating sound of absolute denial. She waved her arms frantically, screaming at the remaining guests that it was all a deep fake, that I was a malicious hacker trying to frame her perfect family. Richard joined in, bellowing for the valet to call the police to arrest me for trespassing. I completely ignored their pathetic noise. I walked straight past my screaming mother and my hyperventilating sister. I moved directly toward the massive, 85-inch flat-screen smart television mounted above the grand stone fireplace. I reached into the breast pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer and pulled out a sleek silver USB drive. The entire room watched in paralyzed fascination as I shoved the drive directly into the side port of the television. With a few quick taps on my synchronized smartphone, the giant screen flickered to life. I did not need to yell over my parents. I had the surround sound system to do the talking for me. The ultra-high-definition video feed filled the massive screen. It was the security footage from my hidden kitchen cameras. The guests gasped collectively as the scene unfolded. They saw me collapsing onto the hardwood floor, clutching my throat, my face turning a horrifying shade of purple as the anaphylactic shock took hold. They saw the sheer physical agony of my body shutting down. Then the audio kicked in, crystal clear and devastating. The guests heard the clicking of Cynthia high heels. They watched my own mother and father casually stand over my suffocating body. They watched the fake notary scurry into the frame. A collective shudder ripped through the country club elites. Several women covered their mouths in sheer horror. The video clearly showed Richard grabbing my limp arm. The high-resolution camera captured every single detail of him aggressively pressing my thumb onto an ink pad and then forcing my biometric signature onto the forged medical power of attorney and the property deed transfer documents. Richard's face drained of all blood. He lunged forward, desperate to stop the broadcast. "Turn that off," he roared, his voice cracking with sheer terror. He scrambled toward the fireplace, reaching frantically for the thick black power cord hidden behind the mounting bracket. He never made it. Harrison stepped perfectly into his path. My lawyer did not raise a fist. He simply planted his broad shoulders, squared his stance, and stared Richard down with the cold, calculating eyes of a legal executioner. "Touch that cord, Richard, and I will add tampering with federal evidence and obstruction of justice to your indictment," Harrison warned, his voice low, but carrying a terrifying weight. "Step back right now, or I will let the billionaire security team restrain you." Richard froze, his hands hovering in the air. He backed away, entirely defeated by the imposing presence of a man who actually understood the law. I tapped my phone screen again. The video feed minimized and was immediately replaced by a sprawling, complex financial diagram. It was a digital map of absolute ruin. The screen displayed heavily redacted but unmistakable bank statements. A bright red digital arrow traced the exact path of the $1.2 million from the fraudulent sale of my house. The diagram showed the money flowing from the naive house flipper directly into a shell account controlled by Cynthia and Richard. From there, another thick red line traced the entire sum being wire transferred offshore. The final destination flashed on the screen in bold, glaring letters: It was Andre's highly leveraged personal cryptocurrency margin account. I turned my back to the television and faced the remaining venture capitalists who had frozen near the foyer. They were staring at the screen, processing the undeniable proof of massive financial crimes. I locked eyes with the wealthiest investor in the room. "You gentlemen actually believed you were listening to a financial prodigy tonight?" I asked, my voice echoing with lethal clarity. "You thought you were investing in a brilliant market strategist who buys the dip and understands corporate acquisitions. You are absolutely wrong." I pointed a sharp finger directly at Andre, who was practically melting into the expensive Persian rug. "You are standing in front of a desperate, degenerate gambler," I announced to the entire room. "You are listening to a fraud who uses his sister-in-law stolen assets to cover his catastrophic margin calls. He did not generate any alpha. He did not secure a bridge loan. He took money acquired through attempted murder and forged deeds and pumped it directly into unregulated crypto funds just to keep his head above water for one more week. If you hand him a single dime of your firm capital, the Securities and Exchange Commission will seize your assets as accessories to federal money laundering." The reaction was instantaneous and entirely merciless. The elite investors did not just walk away this time. They pulled their mobile phones from their tailored suit pockets in perfect unison. The silver-haired lead investor dialed his chief operating officer right there in the middle of my parents' living room. "Terminate the Andre account," he barked into the phone, his eyes glaring holes into my brother-in-law. "Cancel the pending contracts. Flag his entire firm to our compliance board. We have zero association with this individual, effective immediately." The other investors mirrored his exact actions. Voices echoed across the foyer, giving rapid-fire orders to liquidate, cancel, and sever all ties. They were actively quarantining themselves from the toxic radioactive waste that Andre had become. Andre's knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the edge of the plush designer sofa, his head burying into his hands. He was hyperventilating, gasping for air as he listened to his entire professional existence being shredded into microscopic pieces. The prestigious career he had built on arrogance and stolen funds evaporated in less than 60 seconds. He was not just broke, he was blacklisted from every financial institution in the country. His career was officially crushed to dust, and the federal agents had not even walked through the door yet. The heavy silence that had paralyzed the grand living room was suddenly shattered by a harsh, rhythmic strobing light. Outside the massive bay windows, the darkness of the suburban night was violently torn apart by blinding flashes of crimson red and electric blue. The tactical emergency lights pierced right through the heavy silk curtains Cynthia had so desperately hung to hide the shattered glass. The flashing colors painted the panicked faces of the remaining high society guests in alternating shades of panic and dread. The heavy oak front doors did not just open. They were aggressively breached. The loud, explosive crack of the entryway being forced open echoed like a gunshot over the uneaten roasted turkey and the vintage champagne. A flood of federal agents wearing dark tactical gear and heavy ballistic vests poured into the opulent foyer. Their heavy combat boots trampled directly over the custom-imported rugs my mother loved so much. Local police officers flanked them, securing the perimeter and physically blocking every possible exit from the dining room to the terrace. Federal Bureau of Investigation. A commanding voice roared, cutting through the chaotic gasps of the wealthy onlookers. "Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them." The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe expression, marched straight past the trembling catering staff and stepped down into the sunken living room. He did not look at the extravagant holiday decorations or the terrified country club elites. He locked his eyes directly on the three people standing at the center of the financial slaughterhouse I had just constructed. Richard and Cynthia Anderson, the lead agent, announced, his voice devoid of any human sympathy. "You are both under arrest. You are facing federal charges for multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, title fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Put your hands behind your backs immediately." The illusion of their untouchable suburban royalty shattered into a million jagged pieces. Richard's face went completely slack. The arrogant patriarch who had thrown cash at my chest just 24 hours ago was now visibly trembling. He raised his hands in surrender, his expensive tailored suit wrinkling, as a federal agent aggressively spun him around and slammed a pair of heavy steel handcuffs shut around his wrists. The sharp metallic click of the locking mechanism rang out with absolute poetic justice. Cynthia did not surrender quietly. The moment the federal agent reached for her arms, my mother completely lost her mind. The polished, sophisticated country club matriarch vanished instantly, replaced by a hysterical, thrashing woman. She dropped to her knees on the hardwood floor, her stunning emerald green gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. She began to shriek a primal, terrifying wail of absolute denial. "You cannot do this!" Cynthia screamed, kicking her legs and fighting against the agents who were trying to secure her wrists. "I am a respectable woman. This is a misunderstanding. My daughter is a liar. You are ruining my dress. You are ruining my Thanksgiving dinner. Do you know who I am?" The agents ignored her psychotic entitlement, hauling her roughly to her feet and securing the cuffs. Her manicured hands were pinned behind her back, her flawless blowout ruined as she continued to sob and thrash wildly. Another team of agents descended upon the plush designer sofa, where Andre was still sitting in a catatonic state of shock. He did not even try to run or argue. The absolute destruction of his crypto portfolio and his career had already hollowed him out. "Stand up!" Andre, the arresting agent, commanded, yanking the arrogant finance bro to his feet. "You are under federal arrest for felony money laundering and insider trading. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Andre stared blankly at the floor as the cold steel cuffs bit into his wrists. The man who had bragged about generational wealth and alpha mindsets was now being dragged out of the house like a common street criminal, stripped of his custom linen suit dignity. The room descended into a frantic, buzzing panic as the remaining guests scrambled to comply with the authorities, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. In the center of this magnificent chaos, Savannah was standing completely alone. The golden child, the sister who had happily cheered for my death to fund her designer lifestyle, watched her husband and her parents being marched out the front door in chains. The reality of her total destruction finally hit her. She had no money. She had no husband. She had no wealthy parents to bail her out. Her entire parasitic existence had just been eradicated. Savannah let out a ragged, desperate sob. She looked around wildly before her tear-filled eyes locked onto me. She stumbled forward, her knees giving out as she collapsed directly at my feet. She threw her arms forward, physically, wrapping her hands around my black stiletto heels, groveling on the floor like a beggar. "Maddie." "Please," Savannah wailed, her voice a pathetic wet screech. "Sister, please, you have to drop the charges. Tell them to stop. I am begging you. I lost my husband. I lost both my parents. They are taking everyone away. How am I supposed to live on the streets? I do not know how to survive without them. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood." I looked down at her. I did not feel a single drop of empathy. I felt the absolute cold perfection of a completed transaction. I reached my hand into the inner pocket of my tailored charcoal blazer. My fingers brushed against a crisp piece of paper. I slowly pulled it out. It was the exact same $500 bill Richard had crumpled and thrown at my chest in the middle of the country club dining room. I had picked it up from the floor specifically for this moment. I looked down at my weeping sister clutching my shoes. I held the crisp bill between my fingers and slowly, deliberately crumpled it into a tight ball. I let it drop from my hand, watching it fall through the air until it landed softly on the hardwood floor, right in front of Savannah's tear-stained face. "Take this and hire an Uber," I said, my voice a low, lethal whisper that sliced right through her hysterical sobbing. "This house does not belong to you anymore. It is currently being seized and foreclosed by the bank to cover the massive debts your brilliant husband left behind. Go pack whatever cheap clothes you can carry in a trash bag, Savannah." Do it fast before the police completely seal the doors and lock you out in the cold." I did not wait for her response. I did not watch her scramble for the crumpled cash. I turned my back on the golden child and walked toward the front door, the sharp click of my stilettos echoing over the sound of her frantic, desperate weeping. The billionaire and Harrison walked right beside me, leaving the burning ruins of my former family entirely in our rearview mirror. 1 month later, the heavy mahogany doors of the federal courthouse closed with a resounding thud, sealing the fate of the people who used to be my family. The air inside the courtroom was thick with clinical, sterile justice. I sat in the second row of the gallery wearing a crisp, white tailored suit. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was carved from solid ice. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a fraction of an ounce of pity. I simply watched the bureaucratic machinery of the federal government grind my abusers into fine dust. At the defense table, Andre looked completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, loudmouthed finance bro who had bragged about generational wealth at the country club was entirely gone. He wore a baggy, wrinkled tan jumpsuit issued by the county jail. He sat slumped in his wooden chair, staring blankly at the polished hardwood floor. Because his assets had been aggressively seized and liquidated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, he could not afford the high-powered legal defense team he had always boasted about. Instead, he sat next to an overworked, exhausted public defender who barely looked up from his legal pad. Andre was an empty shell hollowed out by his own catastrophic greed. When the federal prosecutor detailed his elaborate money laundering schemes and his desperate attempt to cover his crypto margin calls with stolen funds, Andre did not even blink. He just stared into the absolute void, accepting his total destruction. My parents, on the other hand, were fighting like cornered rats. Richard and Cynthia had quickly realized that federal mandatory minimums did not care about their country club memberships or their suburban social status. To save themselves, they had instantly turned on each other. Cynthia stood before the federal judge, her voice cracking with theatrical sobs, claiming she was a helpless victim of her husband and his financial coercion. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at Richard, screaming that he was the mastermind who brought the fake notary into my house. She desperately tried to paint herself as a confused mother who just wanted to help her youngest daughter. Richard fiercely fired back, his face turning a deep shade of purple with indignant rage. He blamed Cynthia and her crippling credit card debt. He loudly exposed her desperate obsession with funding Savannah and her expensive fertility treatments to keep up appearances with their wealthy friends. It was a pathetic, disgusting display of mutual destruction. They threw each other under the bus with the exact same ruthless efficiency they had used when they signed the hospital papers to end my life. They aired every dirty family secret in front of the packed gallery, proving they possessed zero loyalty to anyone but themselves. The federal judge, an imposing woman with zero tolerance for suburban entitlement, slammed her gavel down to silence their pathetic bickering. The sharp, loud crack echoed through the vast courtroom, instantly commanding total obedience. The judge glared down from the elevated bench, her eyes narrowing with absolute contempt for the two people standing before her. "I have presided over complex financial fraud cases for 20 years, the judge announced, her voice echoing with absolute disgust. "I have seen corporate embezzlement and elaborate Ponzi schemes designed by ruthless criminals. But the sheer depravity of your actions defies human comprehension. You did not just forge a power of attorney to execute an illegal real estate transaction. You actively attempted to withdraw life-saving medical support from your own comatose daughter. You were perfectly willing to pull her breathing tube and let her suffocate to death simply to expedite the theft of her personal assets and fund a luxurious lifestyle for yourselves. That is not just wire fraud. That is predatory, calculated malice of the highest order." The entire courtroom fell dead silent. The truth of their monstrous greed hung heavy in the air, leaving no room for excuses or fake tears. The judge did not hesitate for another second. The wooden gavel fell again like an executioner blade. She sentenced Richard and Cynthia to 5 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. Andre received 8 long years for interstate money laundering and executing fraudulent wire transfers. Furthermore, the judge ordered the total seizure of all their remaining worldly possessions. Their bank accounts were officially drained by the federal government. Any remaining luxury vehicles, jewelry, and property tied to their names were completely forfeited to the state to pay the massive financial penalties. They were stripped of their wealth, their freedom, and their fake identities. They were left with absolutely nothing. The heavy-set bailiff stepped forward, grabbing their arms to lead them away. The cold metal chains around their wrists clinked loudly in the quiet room. As they were marched down the center aisle toward the holding cells, Cynthia locked eyes with me. The harsh reality of a concrete cell finally shattered her grand delusion. She realized she was trading her silk gowns for a rough prison uniform and her exclusive country club dinners for standard cafeteria trays. "Maddie," she shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the marble walls of the courthouse corridor. "Maddie, please forgive me. You are my daughter. Do not let them take me away. Tell the judge you forgive us. I am your mother." Her desperate cries bounced off the high ceilings, a pathetic wail of a woman who had finally run out of lies and manipulation tactics. The gallery watched in stunned silence as she dragged her feet, physically fighting the bailiffs in a desperate, frantic bid to reach me. I stood up from the wooden bench, smoothing the pristine fabric of my white suit jacket. I looked directly at the sobbing woman being dragged away in handcuffs. I did not speak. I did not smile. I did not offer a single ounce of comfort or hesitation. I simply turned my back on her, walking straight out of the courtroom and out the heavy front doors toward my waiting car, leaving her desperate screams echoing into the absolute void. The federal prison system had them now, and I had a massive empire to rebuild. The federal prison system swallowed my parents and my brother-in-law whole, but the universe had a very different kind of punishment reserved for the golden child. Savannah did not receive a prison sentence. Because her signature was not physically on the forged power of attorney, the federal prosecutors decided not to indict her. They let her walk free. But freedom is a relative concept when the government seizes absolutely every single thing you own. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the bankruptcy courts systematically dismantled her entire life. They took the suburban mansion. They confiscated the luxury vehicles. They even sent agents to seize the Hermes bags and diamond bracelets she had so proudly flaunted on her social media live streams, selling them at federal auctions to pay back the investors Andre had defrauded. Savannah was stripped down to the absolute bare bones of her existence and violently ejected from the high society she had worshipped. 6 months after the trial, Savannah reality was completely unrecognizable. The woman who used to complain about the temperature of her expensive lattes was now working the graveyard shift at a decaying gas station on the desolate outskirts of the city. She wore a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform that permanently smelled of stale cigarettes and spilled gasoline. Her previously flawless blonde hair was tied back in a messy, greasy knot. Her expensive manicures were a thing of the past, replaced by chipped nails and calloused hands from scrubbing the sticky linoleum floors at 2 a.m. She lived in a cramped, poorly insulated public housing apartment where the radiators rattled loudly and the hot water rarely lasted more than 5 minutes. She was drowning in the residual legal debts and tax penalties Andre had left behind. She was counting crumpled dollar bills and loose change just to afford instant ramen noodles. Her wealthy country club friends had blocked her phone number the exact second the FBI raided our parents' home. She was entirely alone. It was a Tuesday night, bitterly cold and completely dead. Savannah was standing behind the bulletproof glass of the cashier booth, leaning her exhausted body against the worn counter. She rubbed her heavy eyes, fighting the overwhelming urge to sleep. Above her head in the corner of the dingy convenience store, an old box television set buzzed with static. It was tuned to a 24-hour financial news network playing at a low volume. Savannah normally ignored the television, finding the financial jargon too painful a reminder of the wealth she had lost. But tonight, a specific name cut through the ambient hum of the store refrigerators like a razor blade. Savannah slowly lifted her head. She stared at the flickering screen, and the breath was violently knocked out of her lungs. There on the television was my face. I looked absolutely radiant, commanding, and formidably powerful. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit, standing confidently in front of a massive, sleek glass skyscraper in the financial district. The news anchor was speaking with a tone of deep professional reverence. A bright, bold banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. It read, Apex Estate Liquidators Secures $50 million Luxury Property Portfolio Acquisition. Savannah's hands began to tremble as she listened to the broadcast. The anchor detailed how my company had rapidly expanded from a boutique high-end liquidation firm into a massive real estate and asset management empire. The network displayed high-definition footage of me walking through a stunning modern office, directing a team of elite professionals. Then the anchor announced the crowning achievement. I had just been officially recognized as the National Female Executive of the Year by a prestigious global business coalition. The screen showed me standing on a brightly lit stage, accepting a heavy crystal award, surrounded by influential politicians and true titans of industry. The billionaire whose watch collection I had protected was standing right beside me, applauding with genuine respect. I was completely untouchable. I had reached the absolute pinnacle of success, wealth, and power. Savannah stared at the television screen, her eyes wide and bloodshot. The sheer magnitude of my triumph collided violently with the pathetic reality of her own existence. The crushing weight of her malicious choices finally broke her completely. She looked down at her stained polyester uniform. She looked at the mop bucket sitting in the corner of the dirty store. She remembered the voice recording I had played for her, the recording where she eagerly told our mother to pull my life support plug so she could steal my money for her fertility treatments. She had cheered for her own sister to die for a few $1,000s. Now that same sister controlled a multi-million-dollar empire, while she was wiping up spilled slushies for minimum wage. Savannah collapsed onto the cheap plastic stool behind the cash register. She buried her face in her rough, unwashed hands and began to sob. It was not the theatrical, manipulative crying she used to perform for our parents. It was a raw, agonizing wail of absolute despair. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had thrown away her only lifeline out of pure, greedy spite. She wept uncontrollably, her tears soaking into her cheap uniform. She was trapped in a miserable, impoverished nightmare of her own making. The golden child was rotting at the absolute bottom of the world, crushed by humiliation and belated regret, while the outcast she had tried to destroy ruled the skyline above her. The universe had delivered its final, flawless verdict. The panoramic view from my new penthouse spanned the entire glittering skyline of the city. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered an unobstructed vantage point of the financial district where my empire now reigned supreme. The chaotic, dusty nightmare of my old, gutted house felt like a lifetime ago. I stood by the massive windows wearing a tailored silk suit, sipping from a crystal glass of sparkling water. The city below moved at my command. The private elevator chimed softly, echoing through the expansive marble foyer. The polished steel doors slid open, and Harrison stepped directly into the penthouse. He wore a sharp, bespoke navy suit, holding a thick leather briefcase. He was no longer just my personal attorney. He was now the chief legal counsel for my newly expanded global enterprise. He walked across the sprawling living room, tossing a heavy stack of pristine legal documents onto my custom glass coffee table. The incorporation papers are fully executed. Madison Harrison announced, a proud, triumphant smile spreading across his face. The Apex Survivor Foundation is officially recognized at the federal level. The initial endowment of $10 million has been cleared and fully secured. We have already retained 30 of the most ruthless litigators across the country. I turned away from the window, setting my glass down on the marble counter. I walked over to the built-in wine cellar and pulled out a bottle of vintage reserve Pinot Noir. I poured 2 generous glasses, handing one to Harrison. This was not just a charity project. This was my ultimate declaration of war against financial predators. The Apex Survivor Fund was designed with one specific brutal purpose. It provided elite, aggressive legal representation entirely free of charge to women who were actively being financially abused, exploited, or manipulated by their own biological families. I was taking the exact same legal firepower I had used to annihilate Cynthia, Richard, and Andre, and I was weaponizing it for every single woman who felt trapped by the toxic guilt of blood relations. If a family member tried to forge a deed, steal a trust fund, or drain a bank account, my foundation would deploy a team of legal sharks to sever their hands and drag them into federal court. "We take our first 5 cases on Monday," Harrison said, taking a slow, appreciative sip of his wine. "One of them involves a brother trying to manipulate a medical power of attorney to seize his sister's business assets." I felt a cold, familiar spark ignite in my eyes. I took a sip of my wine, the rich, dark flavor perfectly matching the absolute victory of the moment. "Crush him," I commanded, my voice entirely devoid of mercy. "I want his accounts frozen by Tuesday morning. I want his entire life thoroughly audited, and I want him facing felony charges by the end of the month. We do not negotiate with financial abusers. We eradicate them." Harrison nodded, raising his glass in a silent toast to the impending destruction of greedy relatives everywhere. He set his empty glass down and picked up his briefcase. "I will see you in the boardroom on Monday morning, Madam CEO." I watched him step back into the private elevator, the steel doors closing seamlessly behind him. I was completely alone in the massive penthouse, but I did not feel a single ounce of loneliness. I felt absolute soaring freedom. I walked past the sprawling living area and stepped into my newly designed kitchen. It was an architectural masterpiece, constructed from flawless imported black marble and brushed stainless steel. It looked like a pristine culinary showroom, but I had not built it for cooking. I stepped up to the massive seamless slab of black marble positioned directly behind the primary cooking range. There were no keyholes. There were no visible seams. I raised my left hand and pressed the inside of my wrist firmly against the smooth, cold surface of the stone. A microscopic laser scanner hidden beneath the translucent layer of marble read the biometric microchip embedded deep under my skin. A soft electronic chime rang out, followed by the deep, heavy mechanical thud of military-grade locking bolts retracting in perfect synchronization. The massive black marble wall silently split down the middle, sliding apart on heavily reinforced internal tracks. The space that was revealed was breathtaking. It was a subterranean-style vault integrated directly into the structural core of the skyscraper. It was exactly 10 times the size of the tiny hidden safe I had maintained in my old suburban house. The interior was bathed in crisp white museum-quality lighting. The climate-controlled air hummed perfectly, preserving the treasures inside. Rows upon rows of reinforced steel shelving held towering stacks of certified gold bullion, banded stacks of $100 bills, and highly classified corporate bearer bonds. Custom mahogany display cases housed priceless historical antiquities, flawless diamonds, and the rarest vintage timepieces in the world, safely entrusted to my firm by the most powerful billionaires on the planet. This was not just a safe. This was an impenetrable fortress of absolute generational wealth. I stepped inside the vault, the heavy steel door remaining open behind me. I ran my fingers lightly over the cool glass of a display case, feeling the undeniable, tangible weight of my own survival. They had tried to strip me bare. They had tried to leave me to die on a hospital floor so they could feast on my assets. Instead, they had handed me the exact fuel I needed to burn their entire world to ash and forge an empire from the glowing embers. I turned slowly, pivoting on my designer stiletto heels to face outward. I looked directly forward, my gaze piercing through the open vault door and out across the expansive penthouse living room. I looked straight into the lens of reality. A slow, sharp, and utterly satisfied smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had walked through the absolute fires of betrayal and emerged completely untouchable. "Never hand your future over to those who claim the title of blood," I declared, my voice ringing with undeniable lethal authority. "Blood is nothing but a biological accident. True family are the ones who stand like a shield when you fall, not the ones who eagerly sell you out for cash while you lie defenseless on your deathbed. You owe nothing to people who view your existence as a financial opportunity. I took one step backward deeper into the glowing sanctuary of my vault. Always build a secret vault for yourself. I commanded, my eyes locking with intense, unbroken clarity. Protect your assets, protect your peace, and protect your heart with the exact same ruthless precision. Because sometimes the absolute most dangerous enemy you will ever face in this world is the exact same person who holds the key to your front door. I tapped the interior biometric sensor. The heavy black marble walls began to slide seamlessly together, sealing the fortress, closing out the world, and locking my empire in perfect, untouchable safety. The marble clicked shut, hiding everything behind a flawless, impenetrable facade. The screen faded to absolute black. The harrowing story of Madison serves as a powerful, unflinching masterclass in self-preservation, financial independence, and the harsh reality of toxic family dynamics. The most profound lesson we can extract from her journey is that biological ties do not automatically guarantee loyalty, love, or even basic human empathy. Society often conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, pressuring victims to endure and forgive unforgivable betrayals simply because the perpetrators share their last name. However, Madison's ordeal shatters this dangerous illusion. When she was at her absolute most vulnerable, fighting for her life in a hospital bed, her family saw not a daughter or a sister to protect, but a financial asset to exploit. This teaches us the critical importance of building your own secret vault, both literally and metaphorically. Financial independence is not just about living a luxurious lifestyle, it is the ultimate shield against manipulation and abuse. When you maintain absolute control over your resources, you control your destiny. Madison survived and ultimately triumphed because she was prepared, meticulous, and ruthlessly protective of her own hard-earned empire. She did not wait for a hollow apology, nor did she settle for peaceful mediations with her abusers. She recognized that setting impenetrable boundaries and demanding absolute legal accountability are acts of profound self-respect. Furthermore, the story completely redefines the true meaning of family. Family is not determined by a birth certificate or forced holiday gatherings. True family consists of the people who stand like an unbreakable wall to protect you when you cannot protect yourself. Madison's ultimate victory was not just in dismantling her abusers' fraudulent lives, but in rising from the ashes to build a foundation that empowers other survivors. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect yourself from toxic relatives, or built your own secret vault of independence? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more empowering content on taking back your power.